She pointed right at him in that crowded boardroom, spitting out the words like a judge handing down a sentence. "You're a fraud." The corporate boardroom went dead silent. Caleb Merritt just stood there in his faded maintenance uniform, holding his toolbox, totally quiet. He didn't flinch, never even raised his voice. He met her gaze with a calm you only get from surviving places much darker than some fancy corporate conference room. Those loud executives judging him had absolutely no clue where this man had really been. And the guy about to walk through those doors definitely wasn't his defense attorney. "Stick with me, because you and I are about to watch her entire concept of power completely crumble." The morning had started out exactly the same as always for Caleb. No fanfare, nothing special at all. Just his alarm buzzing at 5:45 and the noise of the city starting to wake up outside his third-floor apartment window down in Bridgeport. He was already awake, though. He usually was. That old military habit of beating the alarm clock followed him right into his civilian life, sticking to him like a shadow that didn't realize it had been officially retired. He worked his way through the tiny kitchen with the silent focus of someone who had learned long ago that speed and complete stillness aren't actually opposites. Coffee dripping, 2 pieces of toast popping up, and a glass of orange juice placed right beside a neatly folded paper napkin. The place was spotless, the kind of clean you maintain when you've seen the heavy price of chaos. It wasn't about showing off, it was just pure respect for the coming day. Right at 6:15, small feet started shuffling down the narrow hallway. His 8-year-old son, Liam, stumbled into the kitchen doorway. Dark hair sticking up from sleep, his school backpack already slung over one shoulder. Like he made up his mind last night that the morning wouldn't catch him slipping. The kid sat down, grabbed his orange juice, and finished his toast without a single prompt. They tackled the early morning routine in the smooth rhythm of 2 guys sharing a tight space for years, totally understanding how to stay out of each other's way. Just before heading out, while Caleb locked up the front door, Liam quietly shoved a folded piece of paper right into his dad's front pocket. Walking down to the bus stop, Caleb carefully opened it up. Written in green crayon, a bit crooked, 2 careful uppercase words, "Win today, Dad." He paused right there on the sidewalk, holding that little note in his hand. Commuter traffic rushing past him on both sides of the street. And you know that exact feeling, the heavy weight of something that doesn't need words to be completely understood. He folded it back up gently, sliding it deep into his work uniform pocket, and held his hand flat against his chest before dropping it. The Vantex Corporation building climbed 42 floors straight above the Chicago skyline. A massive defense contractor tower of glass and steel, catching the morning sun and reflecting it over the city streets in pale, sharp lines. Caleb rolled his maintenance cart through the service entrance at 6:58, nodded at the lobby security guards, then rode the freight elevator down to the basement, and grabbed his daily work orders right out of the wire basket. 3 jobs logged overnight, 2 were standard fixes. But the third was a critical flag on the power system for the 31st floor, the high-security executive level. The ticket warned, "Primary load distribution module, repeated fault cycling, totally unresolved." Caleb had actually flagged this exact same module 2 weeks earlier. "You and I know how this works." He logged the issue, listing the exact replacement part. He warned them the power system flaw would only worsen. Some executive read that warning. No one bothered ordering anything. Carter, the loud-mouthed assistant handling maintenance tickets for the executives, just closed the ticket entirely. Caleb saw the dismissal and stayed quiet. He always processed what he couldn't change, never wasting a single breath on corporate egos that were already decided. He simply packed his tool cart and rode the elevator. CEO Diana Ashworth never really looked at maintenance guys, not out of pure spite. But to her highly paid mind, the quiet staff were just pipes and wires, not people. She spent 16 years building the Vantex Corporation, starting with an average local real estate firm that every financial analyst had written off as overextended, transforming it into one of the most ruthless defense and technology empires in the Midwest. She did it with an intense, loud confidence that crushed anyone in her way. She could spot her exact goal and bulldozed toward it, completely ignoring the quiet people standing around. By age 39 she was called a genius so loudly and so often that the word felt completely empty. Forbes crowned her executive of the decade for 2 years straight. She dumped those trophies in a closet. She didn't need shiny metal on the wall to remind her of greatness. Her true guiding compass was something far more dangerous. Something far simpler and heavier than any corporate award. Let's think about this. She believed her loud voice meant she knew more than anyone else. That blind arrogance had worked for 16 straight years. Nobody had ever truly managed to prove her wrong yet. Today marked her biggest corporate executive meeting in 3 years. A contract worth $160 million. A formal partnership with the Defense Department to build high-security power systems for active combat zones, a project they called SONUS. The big board presentation was set for 3 this afternoon. Sofia Vargas, the senior systems engineer, sat quietly at the table's edge, staring at her laptop. She looked tense, a quiet warning sign the CEO saw but arrogantly chose to ignore. Just yesterday, Sofia had formally submitted a written warning, spotting a dangerous power system flaw hidden inside the proposal. A missing 11% power loss factor for hot climates. She warned them quietly and precisely. If this tech went to a desert over 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the entire energy grid would fail. Diana read the warning, checked the tight schedule, and dismissed it completely. No edits allowed now. The flawed proposal would stay intact. Sofia shut her screen, letting the loud executives win temporarily. Now it was pitch day, and that hidden failure weighed heavily on the engineer, haunting her. You and I know the truth. Ignoring a danger never makes it disappear. Meanwhile, Caleb hit the 31st floor, parking his tools in the shadows. The failing cooling system looked exactly as he had predicted. The power module was misfiring, and that ignored warning was already causing a dangerous chain reaction. He hooked up his diagnostic scanner and studied the screen. Then he started sketching the fix on his battered clipboard. His handwriting was tiny and dead precise. Look closely with me. He wasn't just drawing a patch, but a complete rebuild of the power sequencing. A real, permanent resolution, not some cheap band-aid hiding the failure. He had worked on these security systems so long that thinking and doing happened at the exact same time. His hands just moved while his brain had already run the math against the secondary system and cleared the defense protocols. That is exactly how true technical mastery looks in action. He didn't rush, his speed was just identical to pure caution. Let's follow him. The tech room opened to a hallway running right alongside the glass-walled corporate conference room at the far end. Sofia had just stepped out, trying to track down this weird mechanical buzz bleeding through the wall for the last few minutes. She spotted Caleb in the hall, kneeling by an open panel, his scanner resting on one knee. She stared at the open panel. Then she looked down at his handwritten notes. "Is that the main load distribution module?" she asked him. "Yeah. Did you say it fails under heavy heat stress?" "Loses 11% load capacity when temps pass the limit," he said. "It's a sequencing flaw. The main module cannot handle the thermal pushback in the secondary loop during a sustained burn." He looked right at her. "I flagged this 2 weeks ago." Sofia just froze completely. She moved in close, studying his sketch. The fix, the diagram, every single number lined up in perfect, careful columns. An engineer reading. Another pro's work never needs anyone to explain exactly what they are looking at. She understood it in 10 seconds flat. "Come with me," she ordered. He trailed her into the executive room. The big power grid presentation was still up. Sofia clicked to section 3, the power schematic, and spun her laptop to face him. Caleb quietly studied the numbers. His eyes scanned the contractor data like they always did. Fast, sharp, stopping dead at every single spot where the math could totally crash. He just set his toolbox down, pulled a pen from his cheap work shirt, and calmly asked if he could scribble on the edge of her fancy printed report. She handed it over without any hesitation. He started writing it out, laying every single step in perfect order, mapping the power correction for maybe 40 seconds, right up until the heavy glass door swung open and Diana marched inside. The CEO saw his dirty maintenance uniform first, then the toolbox. Then she noticed this total nobody was standing at her screen, pen in hand, literally writing on her private materials. She didn't ask for a single explanation. The loudest person in the room already knew everything. "Who gave you access to this room?" Caleb turned around. No panic, absolutely no apology. Sophia asked me in. Diana shot Sophia 1 second glare, then stared Caleb down. Her tone was icy and tight, the way executives sound when they're angry. This is a restricted meeting space. You do not have clearance to be in here. And you absolutely don't have authorization to touch those materials. There is a massive error in your load distribution model, Caleb replied. His voice stayed perfectly level, not aggressive, not scared, just completely direct. You and I recognize that tone. The sound of a man stating a simple fact that doesn't need anyone's permission. The loss compensation coefficient for high-temperature environments is missing from column 3. If this defense system deploys in a region where ambient temperatures exceed 40 degrees Celsius, the power grid will lose load integrity across the entire installation. The 5 research executives exchanged smug, judgmental glances. Not one of them actually spoke. Diana stared at him, her gaze lingering with that familiar, dripping corporate arrogance. When she finally answered, her tone held the lightness of pure dismissal, the loud arrogance of someone who had already decided he was a nobody and was simply completing the step of ignoring him. Where did you learn that? She asked him. Online. 2 loud people at the table laughed. You and I know that laugh. It was nervous relief, not amusement. Caleb heard it perfectly. He did not look at the loudmouths. The coefficient is wrong, he stated, keeping the exact same calm tone he used the very first time. The correction is written on page 3. Every step is right there. I am absolutely sure it is, Diana scoffed. She glanced at Carter, hovering in the doorway. Please take him back down where he belongs. Caleb quietly picked up his toolbox. He walked past security without fighting back, showing no anger, lacking that stiff posture of a wounded ego. He stopped at the door, completely ignoring Diana, to look back at the presentation screen. Then he spoke with the steady calm of a true expert. The air conditioning will be running in 15 minutes, he said. Those printed numbers are correct. Whether that matters to you before 3 is your call. He turned and walked out. Sophia stood frozen in the sudden silence, staring at the paper in her shaking hand. The handwriting in the margin was precise, neat, and unhurried, written with the quiet patience of a man used to fixing technical disasters in far deadlier conditions, in freezing cold and blistering heat, in the kind of pitch darkness where cold facts are the only thing keeping people breathing. She read his math once, then twice. Every single calculation he made was flawless. She knew he was right before finishing the very first sentence, simply because she had spent all of yesterday running that exact same mental math and hitting the identical answer. And the only difference between her and the quiet maintenance man who had just been escorted away was that she was too terrified of the loud executives to speak. Down in the basement, cool fluorescent lights hummed faintly, tucked far away from the ignorant egos upstairs. Caleb walked back into the quiet service corridor. He finished the cooling system repairs and ran the diagnostic twice. The defense system passed both times, exactly as his mind had predicted. He logged the repair, signed his name at the bottom, and clipped it to the board. He sat on his tool cart for a second, but not because he was physically tired. You and I both know the feeling. The body demands a brief pause that the mind has already blown past, so you give in. He pictured those flawed presentation numbers, without an ounce of anger or frustration. He spotted their massive engineering failure in 30 seconds. Not because he had a gift for exposing the mistakes of arrogant people, but because he spent 7 years running those networks in war zones, where an 11% load drop wasn't a boardroom debate. It meant a blackout, a total failure of military communications. It meant 300 troops lacking water or medics in 110-degree heat. 12 long years ago. The loudest guys in the room rarely know who they're judging. Take Cable, 23-year-old West Point grad, degrees in electrical engineering and systems design. He didn't just scrape by, he finished top 3% of his class. The very next summer, the Army Special Forces hand-picked him for a highly classified training program. They didn't train these combat engineers to kick down doors. They trained them to keep the critical infrastructure alive. Without them, nothing else works. Power, water, encrypted communications. The hidden bones of covert operations you never hear about on the evening news. 7 years, 3 tours, twice to Afghanistan, once to Iraq, plus a shadow posting. a deployment that officially didn't exist in any file he could legally talk about. You see, Caleb wasn't your standard guy with a rifle. He was the man keeping the power grid running in hostile zones, where the lights shutting off meant entire units died. He pushed defense hardware way past its limits, working with gear totally unsuited for those brutal environments. He built fast, improvised solutions, field fixes that later literally rewrote formal military engineering manuals. He learned the hard way about the gap between strict textbook engineering standards and what the real world demanded. It took a guy willing to stand in both worlds at once to close that massive gap. Then November hit. His wife died in a tragic car crash on a random Tuesday night. Caleb immediately filed for discharge. Not because the work broke him, he was fine, but his son Liam was just 5. And a little boy needs one parent who walks through the door at the exact same time every evening. No sudden deployments, no terrifying uncertainties. Now he pulled a folded piece of paper from his work pocket. "Win today, Dad." Caleb held it tight, pressed his palm flat against his shirt, felt the weight of it over his heart, and just breathed. He tucked it away and went to finish his final 2 maintenance tickets of the morning. At 3:45, he was waiting at Liam's bus stop. The kid walked off carrying a rolled-up drawing held together by a rubber band. He handed it over to his dad, no questions asked. Like trading hand-drawn art was just a quiet, everyday rule of their life together. "It's the solar system," Liam said, matching his dad's slow pace. "But I drew Pluto extra big because I think it totally deserves it." "It doesn't meet the orbital clearing rule," Caleb said. "I know. I feel bad for it anyway." They walked half a block in total easy silence. Then Liam asked, staring at the sidewalk, "Did something happen today?" "Why do you ask? You're being extra quiet." "I'm always quiet." "Extra quiet," the boy pushed back, showing that sharp focus of an 8-year-old who misses absolutely nothing when it comes to his dad. Caleb stayed totally silent for another half block. "Someone argued with me today about something I absolutely knew was correct." Liam chewed on this with the heavy seriousness he gave to all important things. "Did they know you were right? They just didn't want me to be." Liam nodded. "My teacher always says the hardest kind of truth is the one loud people refuse to ever hear. She says those are exactly the things worth saying anyway." Caleb didn't say a word, but you and I would notice his shoulders shift, like solid ground, finally settling back into a much more honest position. Later that night, they cooked boxed pasta together, simply because it was Tuesday. And Tuesday was always pasta night. A rule Liam had set 18 months prior with a quiet, unbending stubbornness. He'd thought it through completely and had zero interest in changing his mind. They tackled math at the kitchen table, working fractions while the water boiled. Liam handled it with the same slow, methodical patience he gave anything worth truly understanding. Caleb just sat across from the boy, letting him spot his own mistakes. He only offered help when his son hit a real brick wall, not just a pause. Once dinner and dishes were done, after bedtime stories finished and the lights finally clicked off down the narrow hallway, Caleb sat alone in the quiet kitchen. He had a mug of dark coffee, mostly just keeping it company instead of actually drinking it. Right in front of him sat the rough system notes he had scribbled down earlier. The power grid correction he drafted from memory, the exact sequence he'd mapped out in Sophia's margin. He just stared at the paper in the silence, not moving a muscle. You and I know that the real truth of a day only appears once the noise stops. Carter sent the internal security email at 8:47. Subject: the system flagged that a maintenance worker named Caleb Merritt had entered a highly classified executive meeting space without an incident description. This triggered an automated security alert. The CEO read it at 9:12, her coffee freezing beside the keyboard. She stared at the screen. Diana finally made the call later that same evening. Her orders were sharp. Find out who this guy is, his background, and why he's here. Carter dug through the HR records for 90 minutes, finding absolutely nothing of value. Caleb Merritt, 37 years old. Brought on 14 months ago by a cheap facilities vendor. A basic tech certificate from a Joliet Community College. 0 university degrees on record. His work history only listed some vague, low-level contract maintenance jobs. Diana listened closely, feeling perfectly justified in her arrogant first impression. He's self-taught, she decided. The kind of person who memorizes technical jargon, from forum, mistaking flashy vocabulary for actual deep engineering knowledge. She had dealt with frauds before. They were a dime a dozen. Honestly, it was the exact profile she prided herself on spotting miles away. So confident but completely lacking credentials. Extremely dangerous because of how convincing they act. She hung up the phone with that smug, toxic satisfaction of an executive who just proved herself right about a lowly subordinate. She wouldn't realize it until much later we'd see her background check was only designed to confirm her own brutal bias. Which, as you might guess, is light years away from actually finding the truth. What she couldn't possibly know. What Carter's pathetic corporate search couldn't access without high-level Department of Defense clearance was that Caleb's standard Vantech employment file only contained what a maintenance job required. His West Point degree, his officer commission, 3 combat deployments. That highly classified third mission, in a country completely scrubbed from public records. The glowing commendations, the fact that he literally rewrote military infrastructure protocol. All of that existed firmly behind a massive federal firewall that some arrogant CEO's HR system could never hope to breach. Next morning, 5 reps from the Defense Department walked in. They hit Vantex for the initial technical systems review. Wyatt Donnell led the inspection group. A civilian tech advisor in his 50s, he carried that quiet, heavy weight of a guy who's seen enough defense proposals to know in 10 minutes flat if a team actually gets their own math. Sophia hadn't slept a single wink. She burned the midnight oil fixing Section 3, running those recalculated figures 3 times through 3 separate environmental stress models. The updated proposal wasn't just fixed, it was undeniably better. The quiet technician's rough sketch actually slashed load variance by 18% across the entire operating temperature spectrum. She just sat there staring. She studied that impossible outcome for hours before finally believing it. So when Donnell hit Section 3 and paused, Sophia felt a heavy silence drop over the room before he even spoke. She'd been tracking his every single move since he sat. Donnell wasn't loud. He didn't have to perform authority, because true focus was just how the man naturally operated. Present and methodical. None of that nervous, restless fidgeting of a guy wanting out. He'd paused twice before Section 3, asking questions that sounded polite but were absolutely, surgically precise in tearing things down. But this third stop at Section 3 felt entirely different. He stayed quiet way longer than he had before. This section was revised since the preliminary defense draft, he noted. Not a question. Yes, Sophia admitted. What exactly got corrected? A critical load compensation error, missing coefficient in the model. Who found it? You and I know it wasn't the executives. Diana froze up top. The CEO shot Sophia a heavy look that was practically a burning warning. Close enough that the difference didn't really matter at all. Sophia stared right back, then faced the quiet tech advisor. A building technician, she replied. His name is Caleb Merritt. Wyatt slowly set his pen down on the table. He paused, showing that sharp stillness of a man quietly organizing a massive thought he wasn't quite ready to reveal. He pulled out his phone, typed something incredibly deliberate, and slid it away without giving the loud executives any explanation. The meeting slowly continued. But an undeniable tension had flooded the boardroom. Every single arrogant suit in there felt a sudden shift in power. At 4 that afternoon, Carter banged on the CEO's door. His panicked face didn't match the standard corporate updates she normally handled. Someone is down in the lobby. No appointment. He wants whoever is running the defense contract. His name? General Joseph Hargrove. Diana dropped her pen. 4 stars, Carter gasped. He commands the Military Strategic Energy Command right now. That's the exact office greenlighting all overseas military electrical infrastructure contracts. Diana shot out of her chair before he even finished. General Hargrove stood right in the Vantex lobby. Let's look closely at that absoluteness. It screamed power, not laziness. He wore no uniform, just a dark charcoal suit, white shirt. No tie, but his commanding posture made his military rank completely obvious. The man was 61 years old. Built with lean muscle from spending decades in harsh conditions, where loud egos die and only quiet competence survives. Watch this with me. The general's eyes automatically scanned the lobby. The careful sweep of a man who assesses every new corporate space like a battlefield. Staff practically handed him the center of the room without a single word. The security guard just stood a little straighter, completely unaware of exactly why. The loudest people demand attention, but true authority commands a room simply by existing inside it. General Hargrove was absolutely one of those quietly imposing figures. Diana approached him, hand extended, her smug corporate composure perfectly glued in place. One brief handshake. Then she escorted him up to the 31st floor executive boardroom. He sat down, planted both hands flat on the wooden table, and stared. He looked at her with the heavy directness of someone completely empty of patience. "I understand Caleb Merritt works in this building," he said calmly. "Facilities," she scoffed. "Just building maintenance." The general stayed quiet for a moment. "Caleb Merritt was one of 8 elite officers I personally nominated for. Early promotion to major before he left the military in 2019. I made that call because I ranked him as the most capable field infrastructure engineer I ever worked alongside during my 30 years of active duty." Diana's arrogant smile completely froze. He built the mobile electrical grid that restored full power to 3 NATO bases in Kandahar, right after a massive ambush completely leveled their primary grid. Got it running in 72 hours, 6 men, 115-degree heat, 0 resupply. Every single power system he designed that week still runs today. Not one critical failure. The 4-star general finally paused. "The exact technical standard your corporate proposal must meet, Military Standard 1399. Section 5, covering deployable electrical distribution in the field." Caleb Merritt actually co-authored the most recent revision of it. He and another brilliant engineer updated that very document back in 2018. Using raw field data nobody else had, because no one else survived where they went. He locked eyes with her, unblinking. "I flew down because Wyatt Donnell called my office early this morning. He said the updated version of your flawed proposal had been flagged as the work of a lowly maintenance technician named Caleb Merritt, and that you loud executives actually tossed him out for trying to prevent a catastrophic power failure. I wanted to hear you explain your own staggering ignorance directly." Down in the basement, Carter found Caleb finishing up his final work. Order of the day. They rode the service elevator up together without saying a word. "You and I know this kind of silence, heavy, awkward, and thick with unsaid apologies." The dead quiet of an executive who sent a nasty email he now deeply regretted. Standing beside the guy he mocked, trapped in a metal box with his own guilt. Caleb just stared straight ahead, refusing to comfort the man who had publicly humiliated him. The doors chimed. He stepped into the boardroom, still wearing his maintenance uniform, carrying his toolbox. He set the heavy toolbox by the door. He stood up tall, looked past the executives, and finally spotted General Hargrove. He froze just a tiny pause, barely even 2 seconds. Then his entire posture shifted. Nothing flashy, but every single suit in the room noticed. We finally see it. The quiet shift of a man respecting true authority from shared experience, while the loudmouth executives realize their massive mistake. 7 years of combat leave a silent residue that 3 civilian years simply cannot erase. "Sir Merritt." Their grip lingered much longer than a normal handshake between strangers. It was the firm grip of 2 veterans who had stood in the exact same rooms, breathing the very same intense pressure, men who quietly understand without needing to boast that the other guys' very survival is absolutely not something to take lightly. Diana watched them, and you and I both know her ironclad corporate ego totally crumbled. General Hargrove slowly turned to face the CEO. His voice was calm and crystal clear. "First Lieutenant Caleb Merritt, West Point, class of 2012. Electrical engineering and military systems design. Top 3% of his class. 3 combat deployments, 8 service commendations. Earned a 2017 Valor Medal for rebuilding the Kandahar power grid under hostile fire." He let that heavy silence sink in. "The exact technical standard your proposal must meet. Caleb co-authored it in 2018, using real-world combat experience the suits in this room couldn't even imagine. So when he walked into this room and flagged a massive flaw in your defense system, he wasn't just guessing. He was reading a flawed document that completely missed a benchmark. A standard he literally wrote in war zones, where failure costs lives, not just corporate contracts. He stared right at the CEO, and your immediate response was to loudly judge him a fraud. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Sophia awkwardly stared at her hands. Carter studied the table. The tech engineers who had so easily dismissed him yesterday sat there with that very specific stillness of folks realizing what we already knew. They completely misjudged the quiet professional. Caleb just stood there quietly, showing the exact same grace he kept for the last 24 hours, the calm restraint of a man who has survived environments where the odds were genuinely unsurvivable, someone who deeply knows at a core level that a glass Chicago boardroom is not one of them, regardless of what any loud executive says inside it. Sophia finally asked the question, before she even fully realized she was speaking out loud. Her voice was small, not aimed at anyone specific, but it landed exactly where she meant it to. Why didn't you say anything? When she judged you, why didn't you defend yourself? Caleb slowly turned to her. When he answered, there was zero arrogance. No loud performance just to prove a point. The hard proof was right there, he said. Anyone willing to look would see it. And shouting wouldn't change a thing for anyone else. He paused. I don't perform to convince people. I work to make sure the right things don't break. General Hargrove then coldly informed Diana that tomorrow's massive defense contract presentation was officially postponed. The Department of Defense demanded a total audit of their entire judgmental executive team before any further corporate commitments would happen. He wasn't killing the defense deal. He froze the deal. Which makes you and I wonder, could this overconfident boardroom ever meet that elite standard? That benchmark is simply not negotiable, he stated. It was written by silent professionals who built these systems with their bare hands in war zones where failure wasn't just a budget line. It stood exactly as written. The general and the quiet guy walked out. By the door, the general murmured something to Caleb. The loudmouths in the room couldn't hear a single word. Caleb gave a nod. They left. You and I know how this goes. The loud executives were left in an undeniable dead silence. Carter tried talking. We could know, Diana snapped. Her CEO tone was still strictly controlled. But something was totally different than yesterday morning. The loud, arrogant certainty was technically still there. Diana Ashworth didn't just break down, but her voice held a new hesitation. The loudest judge finally felt some doubt. A sharp, tiny crack, exactly the size of that 11% error. Her blind confidence couldn't cover it. It never actually could, even when she was busy acting like the smartest person around. She stared down at the dismissed technician's handwriting on that printed system report. Small and exact. Written with the calm patience of someone used to making critical fixes under fire. Places where useless talk didn't matter. Only raw facts and absolutely correct technical details kept people alive. He knew I wouldn't listen, Diana realized. It wasn't a question. Sophia just nodded. Then why even write it down? Sophia stayed quiet for a long second. Because it was the right thing to do, she eventually replied. Whether the boss read it or not, Diana absorbed that harsh reality. She didn't argue. She didn't twist the words or search for some corporate excuse to dismiss the quiet man's warning. She just sat there, absorbing a heavy realization that loud people rarely face. The crushing weight of a hard truth, hitting her right in the chest for the very first time. A quiet, undeniable feeling demanding that she finally stop faking her absolute superiority. She had certainly been wrong before. Look, you and I know anyone building defense tech makes expensive mistakes. But her past errors were fixable, easily audited and folded into tomorrow's plan. The loud executive usually brushed off her bad calls as simple data problems, nothing personal at all. Hidden metrics, missing variables, or corporate stances held until the financial data finally shifted. But this failure was entirely different. She held all the facts. Sophia had brought it straight to her desk. In plain writing just before that executive presentation. She stubbornly chose to ignore the warning. Then she saw it again, penned by the very guy she loudly judged and dismissed as a total fraud. Yet she chose pure ignorance until a 4-star general forced her hand completely. This arrogant mistake wasn't asking for a simple boardroom correction. It demanded something quieter, much more permanent and incredibly difficult to actually produce, real humility. We're about to see what happens next, but she certainly knew she couldn't just sweep this failure away. Downstairs, the power system maintenance floor was peacefully quiet at 6 p.m. Caleb was quietly running his final close-out checklist when heavy footsteps echoed nearby. Someone moving down the corridor with a different rhythm than the usual corporate suits. General Hargrove appeared right in the doorway. No loud entourage, no fancy vehicle idling at the back gate. Just the man himself, jacket draped over an arm, giving Caleb that same quiet respect they shared back in the field. Real professionals recognizing each other, no loud judgments. A bond that didn't need flashy talk, it was already proven. You're actually still doing the checklist, Hargrove noted. It just needs to get done. Hargrove sat in that single plastic chair. He possessed the quiet ease of a general who felt completely at home with cheap, functional furniture. I have a proposal, not an order, just a proposal. The Strategic Energy Command is redesigning our next-generation military power systems standard. We need a lead engineer who truly knows this tech inside and out. Advisory contract, remote work, you set your own hours. Major's pay. Caleb didn't react, just kept loading his maintenance cart. I have an 8-year-old, I know, needs his dad by 7. Remote work, no deployment. You work around whatever your boy needs. Caleb paused, looking toward the window. Outside, the Chicago evening was settling into quiet, dark layers. The final pale sunlight was slowly fading off the western edge of the sky. Street lamps cast an orange glow below, while the tower's cold glass reflected the entire city at once. He had stood in far darker combat zones with much less, and still found enough reasons to survive. I'll think about it, he finally replied. Hargrove stood up, adjusting his dark jacket. He walked toward the door like a guy who had delivered his message and felt absolutely no need to prove himself to anyone. At the door, the general stopped. Know what I remember most about you in Kandahar? Caleb met his eyes. You never needed the suits to know what you were doing. You just needed the grid to stay online. Hargrove left. You and I know the truth. Caleb stood alone for a moment. He sat on his tool cart, reached inside his worn jacket pocket, and carefully unfolded a drawing made in green crayon. When today, Dad? He read the childish letters, holding it closely, then folded it up with the gentle precision of a man handling his most priceless possession. He tucked it safely over his heart and headed home. It was pitch black outside when this supposed fraud finally pushed his cart out the service doors onto the freezing sidewalk. Behind him, the massive Vantech tower stretched 42 stories high. Every single floor was shining, forming a giant column of steady, unbroken light climbing upward. It pierced the cold Chicago sky, glowing the way offices do when the loudest voices are still grinding away. Still arguing, still completely clueless about the massive disaster they had narrowly avoided today. Caleb had kept systems running in classified war zones that didn't even have official names. He understood the bloody cost of keeping that power flowing way better than any executive upstairs. He never looked back. The arrogant suits inside weren't worth another second of his time. Somewhere up on the 31st floor, a humbled CEO sat silently at her huge conference table, staring at his handwritten notes. She was starting to grasp a truth she had completely ignored before today. True, world-class engineering competence rarely bothers to announce itself loudly. It just wears whatever cheap uniform gets the job done. You and I see it often. The loudest people usually know the least about the quiet genius standing right in front of them. Meanwhile, in a tiny third-floor apartment across town in Bridgeport, a little boy in blue pajamas sat at a worn kitchen table, drinking warm milk next to his math homework. His pencil scratched quietly against the paper. It was the only sound in the empty room. Waiting for that specific familiar heavy footstep on the stairs. Waiting for the click of a key turning in the lock, bringing Caleb Merritt safely home. The quiet technician who kept power grids alive in classified zones hidden from any public map. The actual mastermind who designed the high-security defense standard those executives were selling. The man they boldly called a fraud, who simply walked out and went home. He walked out carrying nothing but the quiet truth and a folded piece of paper. Covered in green crayon, he navigated the darkening city streets, bringing along his cart and toolbox, and the heavy weight of true engineering competence, which never needed a loud judging audience to be real. He didn't win by yelling louder. We know he didn't win by proving himself to those loud people who wouldn't look. He won the only way that lasts. By staying completely grounded in every room, under intense judgment when giving in would have been much easier. Exactly who he really was. And tucked into his front pocket, resting securely against his chest. You and I know that little green drawing was finally proven right.